Welcome everybody back to the multi-location marketing show. I am here with Matt Nickols. My name's Elliot. We're your hosts for the show. If you're new to here, welcome. Today we are talking about something I'm really excited about, which is how do you measure the opportunity with organic visibility? How do you actually understand how to take it from where you're at right now in terms of your ranking, how you're showing up in search, and how do you quantify that in a dollar and cents amount? And so I thought first what we could do is kind of have you, Matt, explain a little bit of what we covered last week, but just to give everybody a refresher of why is organic visibility important, and why is it something that we should be paying attention to as multi-location marketers?
Sure. Well, we always love organic visibility, as do our clients, right? We call it the holy grail of local marketing. And really that's because, it's very trusted by consumers. Google obviously knows that it converts really well. There's really never been something devised by humankind that's more effective at connecting people looking for a product or service in a certain geography with people that can provide that service. So there's a high level of intent. It generally converts really well. It's earned, and organic rankings are very trusted, and they never go away, if you run out of budget. And what we found over the years of doing this, and obviously one of the most important things is the financial ramifications. We can generate organic leads a lot of times, as much as 1/25th the cost that the same ads would cost with paid campaigns. So there's really a lot of value there. And for that reason, it's a great foundation for any local marketing program because it's always there. It's cost effective. It grows and grows over time. It casts a really wide net around, your primary geography, as well as other geographic terms people may look for to find you, suburbs, other types of geographic terms that they might call an area that aren't the primary, but you still want to be found for them. So it's a great foundation. And then you can always augment that with your paid digital advertising or other tactics that maybe cost more and help to kind of dial in your overall marketing and get you more visibility. But for those reasons, we find it to be really effective.
Well said. And it's a great equalizer. So whether you're a multi-location business or even a small business, which is really, if you're a multi-location business, you're basically a bunch of small businesses that are all under one umbrella. It allows you to be a lot more competitive in a local market when you may be going against another brand that is investing a ton in paid. So we work with...
That's a great point. I mean, I wanted to say too to that we advise a lot of our clients. They may be going up against, the 800-pound gorilla in their space, like in the mortgage industry, for example. We work with a lot of mortgage companies. Rocket Mortgage, from Quicken Loans, they have tons of money and they dominate all the paid search. But at the local level, it's a lot easier to compete against them because if you're really dialed in and you're highly relevant to that local market, you can really compete. And so a lot of our clients really, that's another factor, when you have multiple locations, rather than trying to compete at a national level, when you really focus in on that local strategy that is being rewarded by Google, you can compete very effectively there. So another great point.
Or the opposite way, if you're a major brand and you want to compete against the local level and you're a massive mortgage brand and you're competing against people who are doing a really great job at the local level, maybe they're just a one-off brand and you want to be able to compete in that local market. It's also good to have a local. So having tools to be able to do that is really important as well. So Cool. Well, let's start off by just kind of defining what's the first step? What's the first step when you go to kind of begin to understand, how to quantify the opportunity, Matt?
Yeah, there always seems to be a lot of confusion around this, even by seasoned marketers, where they may think doing local marketing is, setting up a Google My Business account at the local level and maybe managing their business listings, and they just check that off the list. But the reality is that there's so much more opportunity there. And the first step that we always say, I've heard it said in multiple different sources. I don't remember who coined this phrase, but if you want something to improve, the first step is to measure it, right? To see where you're at now, what's attainable, and then develop a plan. So when you start to measure something, then it really underscores like maybe the opportunity you're missing out on, or how well you're doing currently. And if you can put a monetary value to that, obviously it's even more it becomes more front of mind and important to say, hey, if we were to improve this by 50%, this is how much it would mean to our company and to each of our locations. So that becomes a really kind of the foundation for improving, is to first see what is the opportunity that we may be missing out on. And when we think about that, the first step really in starting to develop that process is to have a really good understanding of what your keywords are that are important for you to be found on. So the way that most people listening to this podcast probably have a really good idea of what SEO is, search engine optimization, keyword strategy. But the most simple way I could put it is, what are the things that you do in a local market that people would be looking for? How would they search to find the products and services that you offer? So, for example, if you're an HVAC company that does, heating and cooling, if someone's searching for AC repair in Indianapolis, that's a critical search term for you to be found for, because that's a primary thing that you do. And there's a consumer out there who is looking specifically for what you do, and they're going to, if you're in the top half of those search results on page one, there's a good chance they're going to click through, they're going to see your brand, they're going to hear your story, and they could convert into a lead. So it's connecting you with someone in your market that has a need for what you do. So you got to think about all those different terms, different ways people could search for the products and services that you do. So I usually break that down by products and services. How do people look for it? What are different ways they could search for it? What are different use cases? And you kind of come up with your top list. I usually like to make sure you have at least 25 or 30. Some people have a couple hundred. But defining that list is going to be really important. So some of the things that you can do to kind of give yourself some more data, obviously it starts with really understanding that, what your products and services are and how people are searching for them. But there are some good tools out there. Google provides some really nice tools. They're called keyword planning tool. It's under really the AdWords umbrella for paid advertising, but it's also really valuable for organic search as well. And they've gotten more and more stingy with their data over the years, but they still give you some pretty good ranges in terms of volume. So once you have your keywords, you can put them into that tool set. If you just do a search for Google keyword planning tool, you can find a link and get there pretty easily. They also have keyword ideas. So for example, you could put in a keyword like AC repair, and then they're going to give you things that they think are relevant to that other people may search. So it will give you some nice ideas on maybe other keywords you should consider. And then it will also give you kind of a national volume range. And sometimes that range can be pretty big. It might say like 10 to 100 searches a month, or 1,000 to 10,000, or maybe 10,000 to 100,000. So sometimes the ranges are really big, but at least it gives you an idea. Okay, these are keywords that are, more searched, so we should put more focus on those. These ones don't have a lot of search volume, so you can kind of extrapolate that. The other thing that I would say is Google's gotten a lot better and a lot smarter at grouping together keywords that are very similar. So we've been talking about AC repair. So for example, Google would probably group together a search for AC repair and air conditioning repair into like the same query result set. So sometimes it's, you might not know, well, what is Google? Is this really the same term, or is it different? And one easy way to find that out is just search for it. Search for it in one of your local markets. And then you'll be able to see if that result set coming back is exactly the same. It may be similar but different. So you can use that to kind of gauge whether or not Google is viewing that keyword in its different iterations as the same, or if they're looking at that as something different. And that gives you a really good idea. You can also see what's kind of triggered in the search results. Like, is there a map pack coming up that has Google My Business listings, which is a different algorithm that's heavily weighted towards proximity. There is some overlap with your typical organic result set, but that GMB listing that shows, the rankings, there's generally only 3 companies that are showing up on the first page. And then underneath that is where the true organic listings start showing up. So when you do a search, you can see if Google thinks that's a transactional type of intent in the search. And if they're showing that map pack, they think it is. Now, if it's just informational results that come back, it's more of what we would call an informational query that they don't think is converting for someone looking for a service, but maybe someone doing more research or trying to gain information about the topic. But those are still great to come up for because, if they connect with you and they view you as an expert, that goes a long way towards potentially, earning an opportunity to win some new business as well. So those are the things that I, really recommend starting with, is defining that keyword list, doing a little bit more research to find out, how to group those keywords, because you don't necessarily need to do all the steps that we're going to talk about for each really specific term. You want to kind of, what is the lead term for that kind of group that Google's kind of grouping together? And then you kind of come up with that list, and then you can kind of see what the volumes are and record that. And that will kind of help you pick, and prioritize your list. So that's really the first step.
Yeah. Aim for that low hanging fruit first. And then, if you have a good handle on this, looking at your long tail terms, where's the cream? Where's the other cream you can scrape off the top that can make a lot of sense to just refine things further. And I will say too, there's obviously branded terms and then there's unbranded terms. So, seeing how you're ranking for those terms that, are most obvious, and then, your near me terms and different things like that as well are kind of, separate. You can kind of see how those are ranking.
Yep. No, that's a great point, because sometimes people will just, they'll use their brand. Well, you should be dominating for your brand. If you're not, you've got real issues. But more importantly, in this exercise, I think, it's good to know that. So you definitely want to be being found for your brand in each local market. So I would definitely include some of those, terms that use your company's name or your product names, in the search. But then also make sure that you are using just non-branded terms, like what people are looking for, the problem they're trying to solve, those types of things, because that's really where people that don't know who you are and don't have a preferred provider are looking for options, and coming up there and introducing them to your company is really a great strategy for growth.
So once we have the keywords defined, once we've kind of gone through that process, we've written them down, we've talked to our team, what's next? How do we, obtain the ranking data? How do we see where we're showing up? How well we're performing essentially.
No, that's a great question. And, a lot of people, there's several different tools out there that can kind of give you ranking data. There's, paid services like SEMrush that can give you some good data. You can do it manually just by going into a browser. There are ways through the development tools that you can tell Google, like in Chrome, that you're searching from your local market, which becomes really important. And then you're just doing a search like you would for, like you were in that market as a consumer and you were looking for the product and service, right? So generally what we do is create a grid. So, the way that we do it is we'll have coming down the left side, like in a spreadsheet, coming down the left side, you'll have all the keywords, that you want to check for. And, that can range. You could have 20, you could have 100, you could have 200. It just depends how much work you want to do. I generally, just to save time, it's good to kind of pick your top 25 or 30, that are most important, just to kind of get a general idea of where you're at. But then obviously over time, you can expand that. You can track more keywords, as you start getting into the effort. And then what we generally do is across the top, in the columns, we'll put the individual markets that you have physical locations or you have representation in that market, right? And so there are kind of two ways you can do it. I mean, obviously you could go through each browser and you can search for that. That's, a very manual way, and it's very time consuming, and charting all of that, so that at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're basically going into a browser. You're telling Google, I'm searching from, let's say you're selling HVAC services in Indianapolis, as we've been talking about. You want to search from Indianapolis proper, and you want to search for that keyword phrase. And then generally you want to add the geographic modifier to that. Now you can do it both ways and you'll get different results set. So, and it's good information to have both of those. So you could search for AC repair and you're telling the browser, I'm searching from Indianapolis, and see how you're ranking and what's coming up. And then you could also do a search that says AC repair Indianapolis, Indiana, right? And that's going to give you a different result set that is even more localized. And people search both ways, right? So
still searching from like you're in Indianapolis.
Yeah. You still want to be in Indianapolis, right? Now, there are obviously cases where people could be, hey, I live in Florida, but I have a house in Indianapolis, and so I'm going back there and I need somebody. So, out of market searches, but it's going to give you a pretty good idea. In general, people are searching from in market that are buying those services from you. So we always will tell Google that we're searching from Indianapolis, and then we'll do the query. Right now, there's some other tech out there that will run some of these data reports for you. We do that at no cost to prospective clients and our own customers, because we have the tech set up and some tools to do that. So if it's something that you need help with or want an assessment, reach out to us. Go to MarketSnare.com, fill out a contact request, and just put that you want a local marketing performance assessment, and we'll happily run that for anybody that needs it. Because we have the tech and the automation's already created, so we have a lot of efficiencies in doing that, and we're happy to talk to you about it as well. But I think that's the key. So, as you think about it with going down, the keywords coming down, the rows and the terms, the markets going across, the columns, then, you can look at each one of those. You can look down a column and see how is each keyword ranking in that market. And you can look at the keywords across and you can see how is this keyword performing in all my markets. And then we can total up, your performance and do an average. Like your average position for this keyword across all your markets is, 7th position in the search results, right? Or going down, you could say across all the keywords in the Indianapolis market, we're averaging, 6th position or 12th position or whatever it is. And that gives you a really good idea to kind of gauge, how you're performing across, all your markets and across all your keywords. And it's a really nice format because you can see at a glance everything. And then you can summarize the data and see percentage wise, across all your keywords and all your markets, how are you ranking? What's your average position? How many of your terms on page 1 versus page 2? And the reason that's really important is if you really understand about click-through rates and organic search positioning, so we call it a SERP or a search engine result page, most of the studies, and it varies a bit between industry, but it's pretty consistent. Somewhere, if you're ranked number 1 for a search, you're generally going to get in the 30 to 35% of the clicks of the traffic that people are searching for that. So if there are, 1,000 people searching for AC repair, 35% or 350 of those clicks are going to come to you. Now, if you drop down to the second ranked listing, so if your site's ranked second for that search query, it drops off. It's generally in the 15 to 18%. The numbers can fluctuate a little bit as Google tweaks things, but in general, the third position might be that kind of 8 to 12%, and then you get down to 4, you might be like 6 to 8, and then you might be like 5, 4, 3, and if you're on the bottom half of page 1, it's 1% click-through rate, and if you're off of page 1, it goes down to maybe 0.3, 0.2, 0.1. So we basically say that if you're off of page one, in essence, you're invisible. If you're at the bottom of page one, you're in striking distance. You're still not getting a ton of the traffic, but you're in the game. And then really where you would need to be is in those top 3 positions. And so that's kind of how we look at it. And when you're gauging, your success and looking at these reports, you can look at, how am I doing? And that gives you a little bit of context as to, where you have room to grow. So if your average position is 9, there is you're probably going to be under 2% of the traffic, is going to be clicking through to you. So if you move up into the top 3, where you're getting, 15, 20, 30%, that's just an exponential gain. So that's why we see when people really start to focus on this, they can just make huge gains in, their visibility, organic traffic coming to their site, conversions, leads, and revenue growth in each of their markets. So that becomes, super important. So just as an example, a lot of times when we run these reports for people that maybe they've got a national brand website with location pages on there, it's not terribly relevant to the local market because that's, one page or maybe a handful of pages on a big site of hundreds of pages. Percentage wise, when Google looks at that, they're saying, well, this site is only talking about AC repair in Indianapolis, like less than 1% of their total content. So they're not very relevant to that. If you have a full local website, that site is dialed in and is like 100% relevant. It's all about Indianapolis and AC repair. So those tend to perform, much better. And when you put that focus on it and you grow, a lot of times, like when they're starting out, businesses will be, maybe around the 10% mark in the top, average top 3 ranking, for all their keywords across all their markets. Sometimes they're doing a little bit better than that. A lot of times we see maybe 30%, plus or minus on page 1. And that's with them, putting considerable effort into making that happen. Now, when you start to localize and really focus on that and come up with some of those more local strategies where you have a lot more local relevance that we've been talking about, we see people jump. We have clients that are north of 75% in the top 3 and 95% plus on page 1. So you can imagine when you make that jump from, being in the 10% range to being in the 75% range, it just opens up the floodgates and you'll see huge amounts of gains in organic traffic, conversion, and lead growth. So that becomes, really critical and why you're doing what you're doing.
I'm hearing the bells ringing and people, some of these SEOs out there, I know you're listening. I'm sure there's a little bit of like, whoa, I heard you kind of mention kind of downplay the, location page strategy. And I just want to let you know, like, we are not downplaying anything that you're doing to get more visibility. That's super important. I just want to highlight, we're running hundreds of these reports, and have ran hundreds of these reports. And we're just sharing what we've seen as averages. And so it's not a play on anything we're saying is not a play to downplay anything that you're currently doing or try to, we're just talking about what works and what we've seen. And, this whole episode's about data. And so if you're someone who is an owner of a company, or you're managing this for your company, managing the digital for your company, or you're an agency that is doing this for clients, the more you can specify on this stuff and get really good at it, it could completely transform your organization just from the organic standpoint. So that's why we're really excited about it. We're not afraid to share this because, I guess we work with a lot of companies and everybody, different sizes, everybody's at a different place. And so there's no shame in kind of acknowledging where you're at, whether you're like extremely good at this and you've been doing it for a really long time and you work for an agency with a company with, $100 million market cap, or a small moving company that's just trying to get trying to grow. maybe you're a family business and you've got, you're in that and you're trying to just piece all this stuff together that you haven't really done before. So knowing your data, knowing your ranking data, understanding how well you're performing currently, understanding industry benchmarks and what's possible, talking to different people to see what's possible. We encourage that. And so just wanted to kind of mention that because there's a lot out there and a lot of different opinions. And we want this to be a place where it's like, hey, this is what's working for us. And this is what we would recommend you kind of think about. So we kind of covered.
I want to speak to that real quick because that's a good point. I mean, I think, there are a lot of people that are doing it through directories, and that can be effective, but what we found is that to take it to the next level of gains, you really need that high level of local relevance. And a lot of people just don't know tools that are out there. I mean, to really implement that strategy, you need some good tech, because otherwise you need an army of people localizing all your content. I mean, updating all these pages. And a lot of the misinformation that we see out there is just people saying, hey, we do it this way because the other way would be untenable to manage. It just would become, a massive effort, and then it's hard to maintain because of all the work that goes into it. And so implementing these strategies, you really need some tech, and that's what we do, with MarketSnare. We try to make that easier and more efficient. But there are, multiple strategies out there that people can apply, and it's not to put down any one strategy. It's just saying what is a way to maximize, the opportunity that you have in those local markets. And,
right on.
And so, the first step is just to start to measure it and see where you're at and see what's possible. Excuse me. If you have benchmarks, that you can see, here's where we're at today, here's what's possible, here's some strategies we can implement to start moving up the ladder, and here's what the result will be and the benefit to us, that's kind of the first step. If you don't understand that and it's just kind of nebulous, pie in the sky, then it's hard to get traction on that. But when you really start to look at where are we today, what is possible, what have other people been able to achieve, and if we moved in that direction, what does that mean, for our lead growth, and financially, for the company. So, and
also once you have a benchmark, you can look at it every month. You can look at it every 6 months, and whether you're managing it, someone on your team is managing it, or an agency is managing it, it just creates accountability for everyone. So that what you're investing in, you're getting your return out of, which leads us into our next kind of question and aspect of this. The next step is, how do we measure how the monetary value we're getting from investing in a strategy like we've been talking about, local visibility, organic visibility, Matt?
No, that's a great question. So it's like the next step then would be to kind of connect the dots on the financial side, right? So what we've talked about is getting those ranking reports so you know how you're performing across each of the markets. And then we want to use some of the data that you already have, right, on your website. So what we generally tell people to do is go look at how much organic traffic you've driven to your location pages, for local search queries. And that's data that's readily available in Google Analytics and other analytics tools. They can tell you, hey, this is coming from organic. This is how many leads that you've converted from organic, based on the amount of traffic you have, right? And that's what establishes what we would call your conversion rate. So how much traffic's coming in versus how many people are actually committing to an action that you value as part of your sales process. And that could be
form fill,
requesting a quote. It could be, downloading a white paper that then you start marketing to them. It could be buying something. It could be setting up, scheduling a service, chatting with somebody, picking up the phone and calling. So, you can put tracking phone numbers very inexpensively on your site. So, how many people are calling versus form fills. So those all become really important conversion metrics. And if you haven't done that yet, that is going to be something that you really need to tighten up, because that data is going to be super important for you to kind of extrapolate the value and the return you're going to get from engaging in, a search engine optimization effort, a localization effort. And so the way that typically works is if you have that data, you can see how many people. So let's say I get 1,000 visitors from organic to my local pages. And what we see, just as a side note, across all of our programs, that local traffic coming to a localized website generally converts at a 30 to 40% higher rate than general organic traffic to a national kind of corporate site. Because you're much closer, you're in that last mile of the sale. They're probably already, they might have been familiar with your brand already, or they want somebody that's local that they feel they can trust. They know they're here in my local community. So a lot of times people, trust that a lot more. So that's why that it converts at a much higher rate. And it's a lot more specific to, the fact that you can actually deliver that service in that local market. And the more your sites feel, part of that local community in the imagery and the nomenclature and the text, that's going to do a lot. It's going to go a long way towards converting better. So that becomes really important. So that's why we really advise not just to look at your overall conversion rate, but that local conversion rate if you have it. If you don't, you could kind of look at your national traffic and get, somewhat of an approximation. I think you'll actually do better than that at the local level when you implement a local program. But those are good numbers to have, right? So if 1,000 visitors come to your website, how many of those are converting into actual leads and opportunities? So if you look at benchmarks, I've seen people say, 3% is good, 5% is good, 15% is good. It really depends on your industry. And that's why I really recommend, instead of using benchmarks, if you have the data yourself, you can look that up and exactly what you're doing and how it's converting really well. If you don't have that data, you can look for some industry benchmarks. Again, if you need some assistance in that, we'd be happy to help. We have some access to that kind of data as well, which is always good to bring in the equation. So once you kind of know what that conversion rate is, so 1,000 visitors come in, you're converting, let's just say at a 5% rate. That means, out of 1,000, you're getting roughly 50 opportunities. And then, I would look at your sales data from there and say, okay, if we generate 50 leads, organic leads, if you have that data, if you have just general web leads, what percentage of those are converting into actually paying customers, right? So you might have a longer sales process, you might have a shorter sales process, but at the end of the day, you should be able to say, hey, if I give my sales team 100 leads from the web, what percent of those are actually converting into business? So let's say it's 30%, right? So we took our 50 leads that we got out of the 1,000, and when we give those over, if we're converting at a 30% rate, 15 of those are turning into paying customers. And then if you have data on what's your average, revenue per customer, you can put that into the equation, right? So if I make $1,000 on average per customer, now I've got 15 times 1,000, I generated $15,000 worth of new revenue. And then, you can take it and say, okay, we have, a 50% profit margin or a 30% profit margin. So let's just say 50% profit margin. And out of my $15,000 of revenue, I created, $7,500 of profit for the company. So, you can adjust that a bit and add in things, based on your model, but that's a really good way to get an approximation. And conversely, not only can you see how much opportunity, so that's kind of like the baseline. And then you can say, okay, now if I grow my organic, so let's say I go from 10% being in the top 3 to 30% being in the top 3, right? You can kind of extrapolate how much more traffic that's going to be. So you can say that's a 30% growth, right? Overall. And there are some different factors you can use to kind of dial in that number a little bit. But in general, you could say, hey, let's improve, what we're doing. If we improve overall organic rankings by 30% and the traffic, coincides and goes up the same with that, what does that mean? If I increase 100%, so now I went from making $7,500 in profit to making $15,000, per location, let's say, of profit. So if you had 100 locations, you take $7,500 of net new revenue that you've generated from this effort times 100 locations, that's a big number. So now you're at what, $750,000 a month of increased revenue that you generated for your company. So that's how it works. You track those numbers, you see where you're ranking currently, you look at the data that you currently have, and then you apply that to the numbers and you say, if we were able to increase this by X, what would that mean to revenue? You can create a few different scenarios and say, at what point, like, what is the investment worth to us to be able to, really make that jump? And if you really want to make that jump, I'd strongly suggest you really look into localization, local relevance, because in all the data we see, I think we manage around 30,000 local markets right now. And across the board, that local relevance is beating out things like domain authority. And that's really been something that's just kind of shifted more and more towards rewarding local from Google and that local relevance more than, the domain authority of a big national brand. So that's why those strategies are really working well, and people that are implementing those are really getting traction and able to kind of realize, those gains that they're projecting and the value that it brings.
I like how thorough you are with that. So we've re-talked about why it's important, why organic visibility is important. We've talked about the importance of defining keywords, obtaining that ranking data, how to do that, and how to use your existing, how to use that data in order to understand ROI. And so just wanted to give you a chance, Matt, to add anything extra, and then we'll call it the end of the episode. Yeah, no,
I think you hit the nail on the head there. Again, just reiterating that if you want something to improve, measure it. If you want to see where you're at and where the opportunity is, just keep in mind that when you get that initial kind of ranking report and you see that, hey, I'm in 30% in the top 3 and 50% on page 1 or 70, there's always room for growth, right? And moving from an average ranking of 5 up to 3, is a huge increase in revenue, for your company and lead generation and visibility because of just how the search game works. So there's no real more cost-effective way to grow sales, grow visibility in the local market that we've seen. And a lot of our all of our agency partners agree with that. And that's why they're using these strategies to really help their clients grow, and they love it. And, SEO is I use the analogy that SEO is like a freight train. It takes time and investment up front to kind of get going. Generally, we see in about the 6-month range, really starting to gain traction in local markets as you implement a new strategy. Say you're putting in new domains, localized domains or subdomains. There's a lot of different tactics that you can apply, but as you do that, there's an investment period, generally about 6 months, and then you start to see it gaining like this. And in general, we see people getting anywhere from 100 to 300 to 400% growth, usually in the first 18 months of a program in terms of their organic traffic and lead gen. But we also see that continued steady growth over, we've had people, 8-9 years on our programs where they're still getting high double-digit and triple-digit growth, like for the same period year over year. And that's just really encouraging to see. And I think the reason for that is these sites continue to build more and more authority. And, if you move up from 4 to 3, that's a huge amount of traffic gain. And you have all these different keywords and geographical terms in those local markets. And as you start to build authority at the local level and you're raising that up and you're adding new content and these sites are growing, it really just casts this really wide net that continues to provide growth, for years to come. And it's a really worthwhile investment. So however you can get that done, I encourage you to, if you're looking for some tools that can help you make that more efficient, to implement some of those strategies to control and make it very cost effective. That's something that we can help you out with, but there's certainly other ways to get the job done. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to help.
Thanks, Matt. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us this week on the Multi-Location Marketing Show, and looking forward to joining you next week for another episode. So bye, everyone.
Take care.